Looks like the student group is back tonight anyway. They should have finished all their papers by now, so. Hey, how are you?
I can move over.
That's okay.
You can sit here. No, it's okay.
That's all right.
No reserved seats.
Well, that's fine.
Are you alone tonight?
Mary Jane is not here. She has the flu, unfortunately.
Goodness.
So it's, we've been battling it.
Will she wire in her interpretation?
I wish.
Hello, how are you?
So yeah, my wife has it too, and one of our other friends has it. It just
Yeah,
seems
it's
to be
been
going
around,
around.
yeah. Hello. Okay, wait for Jordan. Oh, here he is. No, that's not Jordan. Let's do the tall, skinny person right there. I'm not spending summer in Israel, no. I'm going to Switzerland for a week. Somebody wrote to me and said, I belong to a chavura in Zurich and we'd like to have you come speak. So he's arranged for me to speak a couple of other places. I'm going to Switzerland for about 8 or 9 days, the end of June. Well, if you want to come to Zurich or Basel, I'll be happy to have a cheering section there. I'm speaking in English. I don't know if they'll translate it into German or whether enough people there understand English. We'll find out, but I'm just doing it in English. And that's it. I'm basically around for the summer. I'm going to Israel for probably 3 months next winter. After this Boston winter, I said I want to go someplace else for the winter. I'm going to try Jerusalem for 3 months next year. Not that the Jerusalem winter is wonderful, but it's compared to Boston, I think it's an easier place to be.
What are you going to be doing there?
But I do. You know, writing and teaching. Yeah. There's a group of Kabbalah Chassidut scholars there that want to study with me. They asked me to teach a class for them, and I'll do that just informally. And basically do my own writing. The easy thing about the laptop, you take it anywhere and do the same thing.
Yeah.
Are you back from Alaska or heading there?
We're going there like
That's awesome.
Go to Alaska? Good for you.
How long are you going for?
like a week.
How long is it going to take to get there?
I have no idea.
No. We have a hard story this week. As I read it today, as I reread it today, I said, maybe he just let the plot get away with him this time. I have not taught Rabbi Nachman, I've not taught the stories probably in more than 20 years. And I taught a class on Rabbi Nachman's teachings, first semester to our graduating class. It's the first time I've really taught Rabbi Nachman in a very long time. So it was coming back to him in some ways. And he remains an utterly fascinating mind, a fascinating character. If I told you this the first class, forgive me. The Tormented Master is coming out in a new Hebrew edition. It was translated to Hebrew very early. I think it came out in English in '79. It was translated to Hebrew in '81. And it was a bestseller in Israel for quite a few years. It's now been out of print, and so they decided to put out a different publisher decided to put out a new edition with an update on the footnotes, all the scholarship on Bratslav that's been written in the last 40-some years. So we have a graduate student in Israel who's working on the scholarship, working on the footnotes. It'll be the same book with additions to almost every footnote of the book. and everything that's happened since then. I'm having a fascinating time communicating with this young graduate student who's doing the notes, and he's just in introduction to the first chapter, and it's amazing to see both. It's amazing to see how much scholarship has been done and how the essential picture of Rabbi Nachman that I painted back in the 70s is still has still held up. So it's eye-opening in both directions. Good evening, sir. How are you?
Were there any surprising discoveries or developments in the last number of years?
Yes, several very major developments. The leading scholar on Nachman after my time is a fellow named Tzvi Mark. Tzvi Mark, Jordan studied with him a bit last year. Tzvi Mark is, maybe he's 40, in his 40s or 50. He teaches at Bar Ilan University. And because he is Orthodox, because he is a typically religious Israeli, he managed to gain the confidence of the Breslov Hasidim in ways that I couldn't. Breslov has held certain documents in secret since Nachman died in 1810. Things Nachman wrote or things Nosson wrote down. Nosson lived until 1845, and after that there were leaders of this tiny Breslov community in Ukraine through the 19th century. And there were certain documents, there's a book called Sefer HaGanuz, the hidden book, and a book called Megillat Starim, the scroll of secrets, which one person in each generation was preserved, and nobody else was allowed to see it. And it survived the pogroms, it survived the Russian Revolution. At some point it went from the dying Breslov community in the Ukraine to Eretz Yisrael, because the Breslov Hasidim had started going to Eretz Yisrael already in the 1890s. And so it was held by one family in Jerusalem. Now it turns out, I think I told you, there are several different competing Breslov communities who dislike each other more than they dislike most people. And the Breslovers of Mea Sharim were afraid that one of these other, to their mind, pseudo-Breslov communities would get hold of these documents and use them for their purpose. Particularly, there was a man, Rav Schick. Schick was a rabbi in Brooklyn. He later went to Eretz Yisrael. I think he lived in America for a long time, who considered and he was going to be the new Rabbi Nachman. And they were afraid if he got hold of these, rather we knew they were somehow messianic documents. That's why they were hidden. What happened with Rabbi Nachman in wanting to bring Messiah, and how much did he think about Messiah, and how much did he fantasize himself as Messiah? In the existing Breslov documents, the published Breslov documents, there are quite a few places, especially in Reb Nosson's own memoir, where suddenly the text is interrupted and it says v'chule, v'chule, etc., etc. And you know that that's a censorship mark. So it was always thought, Joseph Weiss thought, already writing in the 50s, before my time, that these were messianic references. Well, Tzvi Mark convinced the Mea Sharim Breslovers to give him these books, and he published them with their permission. And they are quite something. They are messianic fantasies. He pictures the Messiah seated on a throne, and they're singing nigunim in front of him and playing instruments, and he's revealing the secrets of the world to them. He doesn't say, "This is myself," but you have a strong impression that this Messiah is a new tzaddik hador, is a new single Rebbe figure, and he looks like a Hasidic Rebbe, and he looks like the Messiah, and these documents are close in spirit to some messianic fantasies that the late Sabbatians, the Frankists, were also circulating. And so the whole question of Rabbi Nachman and his relationship to messianic heresy, to the influence of the late Sabbatians, is now reopened because of that. So those are very big developments. Tzvi Mark was quite amazed. I'll tell you, I'll put a feather in my own cap. I said in the chapter of Messianic Strivings that the Messianic movement began. The year his son died was 1806, and that's when Messianic fantasies began, and that is because the year Taksav, which is 566, is in Gematria Mashiach ben Yosef. And how did I know that? It's not mentioned anywhere in the Breslov literature, but I happened to be reading another book, a 17th century but a couple hundred centuries earlier, mystical text from Poland, and he mentioned that the gematria of Mashiach ben Yosef was Taksav, and I remember Taksav, translated to Latin years, is 1806, and I said that purely on speculation, and Mark found in these documents that he says Mashiach ben Yosef is announced in Taksav, so I felt somewhat vindicated, my scholarship was somewhat vindicated by that. Well, now we've stalled enough, let's go to the Baal Tefillah. We will do our usual two introductions, but we're probably not going to divide the story up the same way. Jordan has a kind of sense of outlining the story, and then we'll jump into it. But let me give a bit of an introduction. The first part of the story is very poignant to me because it is Nachman's ideal community. This is the Rebbe Nachman would like to have been, living in the woods with his Hasidim and completely cut off from people and just engaging in Sigufim and Ta'anesim, just engaging in ascetic practices and fasting and singing songs, singing to God all day long. And in this community in the woods, you could wear whatever you wanted, didn't make any difference, and they would eat the fruit off the trees. And Nachman is a Rebbe who is not completely happy with his Hasidim and his situation. He often says to them that they don't understand him. And all the conflict he's had with other Rebbes. He settles in a town near the Shpoler Zayden, has a terrible fight with him, and then he's fighting with his uncle Baruch. And the idea of sort of this carefree life in the woods, this community in the woods which the Baal Tefillah leads. And they go into town occasionally and they catch somebody. They see some nice young person and say, oh, don't you think the most important thing is to seek God? And they get him to come out, they sort of seduce the person to come out into the woods with them and join their community. I think that's Nachman's fantasy of the life he would have liked to have lived. And of course, for all kinds of real reasons didn't. That's the first thing I want to say, and so he is very much identified with his Baal Tefillah. But the Baal Tefillah is not powerful enough to stand up against the kingdom of money. Kingdom of money is a very powerful, wicked kingdom. Or a very powerful, let me not use the word wicked, deluded kingdom. I think we see here, and I say it about Nachman in other contexts. I'm now writing on Levi Yitzchak, and I see it in Levi Yitzchak as well, who's a generation older than Nachman. You see Hasidism peering over the edge into the modern world. And he seems to sense nascent capitalism. And that people are living in pursuit of money and making money their God. And money is the most important thing. Was it not always that way, you could ask? No, I think in some ways some of the other kingdoms have longer histories. The kingdom of kavod, the kingdom of respect, glory, respect, where people wanted kavod. If you ask people the shtetl values, what they wanted, I think it was, obviously you wanted money to survive, but I think people were more kavod hungry than money hungry, more honor hungry and respectability hungry. I think some of these other kingdoms are real. Of course, remember, this is a year after the other story, we're still in the Napoleonic Wars, and so the warrior coming through who upsets everything and turns everything upside down. We watch Napoleon march through Europe, and everything of the old order is being challenged. And there is a great whirlwind. There is a great whirlwind of war that upsets everything. How did people like this react to the news of the French Revolution? That was 1789. Nachman is in his teens then, and hearing what's coming. Remember, he likes to hear news. He wants people to bring him news. So he knows what's going on in the various Napoleonic struggles. Remember in 1798, this story is told in 1808, 1809. Remember in 1798, he'd been on his trip to Eretz Yisrael and had been caught up in the Napoleonic Wars in the Mediterranean. So he knows about these things. And I think that upset of the universe, what do you do with a world turned upside down? How do you explain it? And what's going to come out of it? Can any good come out of it? Or is it only calamity coming out of it? Is it simply destructive? Or is it, as you always hope in these apocalyptic fantasies, you always hope that out of the turmoil, out of the chaos and upsetting of the false old order, some good is going to come. That's the dream. And I think that's there in the story. And that's as far as I'll take it, I think. It's clear that though there are all these other kingdoms and all these other false value sets and false gods, it's clear that that money and power are what it's about, or money and violent power. Yes, the kingdom of money and the warrior are the great competitions with the great competitors, let's say, with the Baltrilla for what he considers important, what he considers powerful, and the others are almost big players. But with that, I toss it to you.
I'm going to do my best to give a rough outline of the story, but also as a preliminary framing for the conversation we're going to have. It felt in some ways like, even though there is certainly a linear structure to the story is very much about 10 different archetypes. So I wanted to arrange the discussion around people thinking through what these different 10 archetypes actually mean. And I think one of the key lines in the story is that the Baal Tefillah understood that he was at a place where all of these archetypes had been: the king, the queen, the treasurer, the princess. He knew that he was at a place where they all were. That the king and queen, etc., must surely be there, only he did not know how to search for them or find them. And I think in a lot of ways, for me, this story is about the ways in which these 10 archetypes are always present and always extant in some way. They're always existing. But when they're in a degraded form, it's really hard to see this sort of the beautiful potential of what those energies could be.
Is archetypes a translation of spheroids?
I mean, in some ways it feels like if they are, it's kind of like a back translation. Like Nachman has these 10 different ideas of qualities. And they're not, midot, yeah,
okay.
But they're not, I don't feel like they're necessarily a part of the symbol cluster of
They don't seem to correspond very well. You try to pin them down, you get 3 or 4, and then it just doesn't work anymore.
But maybe in the same way that the story we read about the paralyzed man completely reconfigured our understanding of the first psalm. Maybe these archetypes that he's spelling out for us are supposed to reconfigure our understanding of what the spheroids are. Okay, so with that, I'm going to do a sort of brief outline of the story to the best of my ability, so that we're all on the same page. And then I will pass out some discussion questions. So the story begins in what Art just described as Nachman's ideal community. Not to Hebrew. I don't know, outside civilization. Okay. And then we move into this kingdom of wealth, which I'll just abbreviate as KW. He gets into KW, he talks to people, he fails at convincing anyone. Redesigning their sort of raison d'etre. The third part is this strange, I guess in literary theory we call it a prolepsis, sort of foreshadowing of a warrior figure. We have a description of a warrior who's approaching. And then we have a description of how the kingdom of wealth starts fearing. After the kingdom of wealth starts fearing, then the Baal Tefillah moves back into the kingdom of wealth to try again. This time he allows himself to get captured by the powers that be. And he tells them who he thinks this warrior might be. And that leads him into an account of the royal court he needs to be a part of, where he conveys to us these 10 different archetypal energies, of which he is one. Okay, so then he is dispatched by the kingdom of wealth to meet the warrior, and he gets to the warrior camp. He talks to the warrior guard, and the guard gives him this additional story about, it's a story about how the different kingdoms of the world formed. So this is where we learn about how there's a nation of Kavod who decided to choose this gypsy elder who demanded Kavod, and we get this breakdown of the 10 different sort of archetypes of what a nation is. Okay.
Which include the warrior and the tefillah. They're 2 of the 10.
Yeah, exactly. And then we have the reunion of the Baal Tefillah and the warrior. And we hear a couple of stories. I think I'm going to start abbreviating some of this outline, otherwise it's going to take a bit more time than I think we have to spare. But his story is about exactly how I began this conversation. He would be in a place and he'd be like, "This clearly is the place. This place reminds me of the queen for some reason, but I can't find her." Then we have a story of the Baal Tefillah, which is a parallel story. He concurs. I've been to a place that it seems like is the place of the treasure, and yet I couldn't find the treasure. So they exchange these stories. The warrior then tells the Baal Tefillah that he's going to destroy the kingdom of wealth. The Baal Tefillah pleads for some more time. The warrior gives it to him, and then the Baal Tefillah leaves. And as he is returning to the kingdom of wealth, he finds his own community, which is an interesting thing. This potentially ideal fantasy community that Nachman had to be outside of civilization is replaced by this second community that very much is of the world and of civilization, is actually developing a more sort of embedded in the world community. Okay. So then some various other types of things happen, and ultimately the Baal Tefillah, the warrior, and the treasurer, I'm very much abbreviating right now, decide to embark on this quest together to find the other archetypal energies, and they gather all of their community together. So this is really like where the heart of the story lies. This gathering together of these 10 archetypal energies so that they can begin to work some kind of healing on this capitalist, consumerist culture. They need all of each other to affect that process. And once they come together, they figure out a way to do that that doesn't involve complete slaughter of the kingdom of wealth. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pass around these sheets. There are some sort of specific questions, and moreover, there are page numbers that will direct you to the different passages where the different archetypes are being discussed. Obviously, you don't have to stick to the questions. Any types of explorations into who are these people, what are their symbols, what do they mean? And I think the main thing that I'm interested in you guys talking about and then us coming together to talk about is what does, for example, a community that, like what does a cult of the queen look like when it is at its best, when it's in its ideal form, and what does it degrade to? What does it look like when I guess what's its vicissitude look like? Great, so.
And the same with each of them?
The same with each of them, yeah.
Jordan, do you want to say take 2 sheets?
Yeah, there's also a bit of Leviticus on the 3rd page, which, sorry, it is minuscule, which we'll look at the very end.